If there was ever a circuit to burst onto the scene in Gran Turismo, only be featured in one game, and yet immediately and indelibly make an incredible mark in the community, not least of which one of the biggest circuits in the game and one of the largest circuits in most racing games, certainly one of the biggest in Gran Turismo, for this episode of Circuit Spotlight I am of course referring to Circuito de la Sierra, or just Sierra as many of us would refer to it. It was, in addition to only being featured in, so far at least, one Gran Turismo game, that being GT6, it was also within said game an update course, so it wasn't even in the game from day one, making it even more exclusive, I guess you could say, within the community. Some people probably never had the chance to play this circuit if they maybe stopped playing before then, but for many of us, myself included, this definitely entered our rotation of courses very quickly and pretty much stayed there. Certainly for me, of course, with my proclivity for loving really long technical courses like La Sarthe, the Nurburgring of course being the key, and this finally being a third true challenger to those two legendary courses. And to me, the only thing, really the only single thing which lets down Sierra is the graphics are quite bad. They are quite horrific when you look back to Gran Turismo 6, as of course you'll see here in the replay. Now, without context, you might think, yeah, it looks alright, but when you really do compare it to tracks like the Nürburgring, Silverstone, various others as well, it doesn't fare that well. It really doesn't. The render distance, the kind of lack of detail in the background, well, it leaves some visuals to be desired, certainly on the finer details points of things. It also feels to me at least like the contrast is kind of turned up a little bit too much. Maybe it's just me, but it seems like a little bit too colourful of a course. Maybe they deliberately did that to kind of correct for the lack of detail, I don't know, but it feels almost a little bit like Mario Kart-ish sometimes with the colours to me, but still extremely fun, fantastic layout. And as and when GT players get their hands on a circuit editor again, you can guarantee this, along with some of my favourites like Complex String, will be up there with the best of them in terms of being replicated. At least if you can make the course big enough to replicate this track. Speaking of its size, as I said, it is a massive course, 27 kilometers long, which is 16.8 miles. Elevation change is quite drastic as well over the course of the track, 130 meters from the lowest to the highest point. It's just under 430 feet. The longest straight section is just over half a mile, and as I said earlier on, it has 45 turns. I do personally find that quite funny. It feels like there's a lot more turns than that on this circuit, but 45 is all you've got apparently. When this was added to GT6, of course, it came along with most notably the Sierra Time Rally Challenge, which was basically the way to access the course, and once you'd done that you could just use it in the game. So it was one of those courses, ironically much like Complex String, which was really big, really technical, only featured in one game, and not really seen that much, if at all, in the mainline career mode. It is incidentally based in the Andalusia region, and for many of us who played GT6, and certainly for those who skewed perhaps a bit more on the younger side at the time, myself included, I mean, started playing GT6 in my very late teens and then earlier 20s, see many cruise lobbies, car show lobbies, because there are quite a few places around the circuit where you can just park up quite nicely at the side of the road and have just a very Nurburgring-esque experience of just cruising around and having a track day. Much like La Sarthe, this feels and essentially is more of a road-based circuit. In other words, you have the oncoming traffic kind of vibe to it as well, which was very fun. One of the disappointing things about the track was it didn't have kind of a day and night cycle. It had a bit of a time change, but not quite what you would want. And of course, when it comes to this particular circuit, there are no variations. It's just the one single version. There's no reverse version. There's no smaller versions. I don't mind that, to be honest. Not everything needs to have variations, much like, again, Complex String and some others as well. It just is what it is. It's exactly what it needs to be. It's a fantastic kind of answer to what some other games at a similar sort of time had, like the, what was it, California Highway, I think, in Project Cars, various other things like that, with more of a real-world, high-speed, cruising kind of feel. Of course, there's not too much to say about using it in career mode events, because as I said earlier on, you pretty much couldn't, so aside from the time trials, it really was what you made of it. And that to me is probably the most impressive thing about this course, because usually when you completely rely on just people essentially making their own fun, a new track or a new car could quite easily just fall into obscurity very quickly because people just can't be bothered. Back in the days of GT6 though, it feels like, to be honest, and maybe it's just me, people used to be quite happy making their own fun in online lobbies, just making chill out sessions, racing sessions. You could have any form of racing on this track, everything from the slowest cars in the game all the way up to formulas and prototypes, rally cars of course, and it was perfect for all of them. And it's one of those tracks where even though it's extremely high speed, if you did have a car which wasn't quite as powerful but was really good through corners, you could kind of make up a lot of time around a lot of the track, even if you had something like a, I don't know, a light car company Rocket or a Caterham, which didn't have the sheer straight line power of something like a Bugatti or whatever else. You could still keep up 9 times out of 10, and more often than not kind of beat those cars as well. Of course, one of the things I do always try to touch on in episodes of Circuit Spotlight is our favourite turns, our favourite corners, maybe a favourite section of the track, and this is probably one of those which, at least for me, is a bit harder to decide. Many of the corners aren't necessarily as memorable individually as something like the corners on the Nurburgring or Lasat or wherever else, but also I think that's partially because of the track being so new to the franchise, so it hasn't become legendary in that kind of way. So for me, I don't think I necessarily have a corner or section of corners which I would say are absolute favourites. I certainly recall the hairpin sections being really good for gaining ground on your opponents, especially if your opponents were maybe less skilled. For me, one of my favourite things about a super long course, and one of the things which favours my driving style, is I'm pretty good at endurance. I'm a consistent driver. I'm not the fastest, but I am pretty good at getting a pretty close lap again and again and again, and I don't tend to burn out on endurance races. Whereas for a lot of people, by the end of a couple of laps of Sierra, they're starting to tire a little bit. Whereas for me, I love it. I love that flow from corner to corner, and it's just that constant barrage of, well, corner after corner, which wears people down. And for me, I love that. Certainly a modern favourite within Gran Turismo for many of us, and I wouldn't be too surprised, you know, if for more than a few people, including maybe those who play GT Sport and 7 now, I could easily see this being still in maybe your top 5, perhaps top 3, or maybe even for some, your favourite recent debut of a circuit. Recent, of course, being in the past couple of games rather than couple of years, of course, within Gran Turismo. I wouldn't knock you at all for saying so. It is one of my favourites, certainly within GT6. It would be awesome to see it back, but I really don't think it has a huge chance, really for two reasons. Number one, it's not the most realistic necessarily of courses. It is set in a real location, but the vibe of the track, I just don't know if it really fits what Kaz is kind of going for these days. Maybe it could, I hope I'm wrong. Secondary to that though, look at how long everything seems to take these days in Gran Turismo. I just don't see them putting that kind of time, the kind of time which would probably get 3 or 4 other circuits in comparison, to just do this one. Maybe they will, but I personally don't really have much hope to see Sierra come back in any form in future, aside from, you know, a mod or a track editor creation. That's it for this installment of Circuit Spotlight though. Of course, I'd love to hear your thoughts and feelings on this track. If you are new to the series, definitely check out the playlist. Of course, it'll be in the description right below and probably here on screen right now as well, because we feature tracks from outside of Gran Turismo and within Gran Turismo as well. So next time I'll see you with more, and for now, thanks for watching.